The scream was a blade of glass, sharp and cruel, slicing through the quiet hum of the cavernous marble foyer. "Get out of my house." Anya flinched so hard, she dropped the feather duster, its soft gray plumes scattering against the polished floor like a startled bird. She looked up from her knees, where she'd been meticulously tracing the dust from the carved legs of a console table. Isabella stood over her, a vision in white silk, her perfectly manicured hands clenched into fists at her sides. Her face, usually a mask of bored elegance, was twisted with a venom that seemed to curdle the air. "Did you hear me?" Isabella's voice dropped to a hiss. "I want you out." Now Anya's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped thing. She was 18, with a soft, full figure that the severe dark blue maid's uniform did little to conceal, and even less to flatter. Her world had shrunk to the size of this mansion, a gilded cage she cleaned in exchange for a tiny room in the staff wing and 3 meals a day. It was everything she had. "I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "What did I do?" Isabella gestured vaguely toward a crystal vase on the table. "That vase. It was 2 inches to the left yesterday. Are you too stupid to remember the precise placement of every object in this house? Or are you simply incompetent?" It was a ridiculous accusation, a pretext so thin it was transparent. The real reason was in the woman's eyes. It was the contempt she held for Anya's round cheeks, for her thick, sturdy frame, for the poverty that clung to her like a second skin. Anya was an imperfection in Isabella's perfect world, a piece of furniture that had suddenly become an eyesore. "Pack your pathetic little things and be gone before Marco gets home," Isabella commanded, her voice ringing with the absolute authority of a queen banishing a peasant. "I will not have someone like you breathing my air." Anya could only nod, a hot, shameful blush creeping up her neck as she scrambled to retrieve the duster. The words echoed in her head, each one a fresh stone cast at her already bruised sense of self. "Get out. Pathetic. Someone like you." Anya's room was in the basement, a small, windowless space with a narrow bed, a particle board wardrobe, and a single dim bulb overhead. It was a cell, but it had been her sanctuary. Now it was just the box she had to empty. Her belongings barely filled the single, worn canvas bag she owned. There was a tattered copy of a novel with a broken spine, a faded photograph of the grandmother who had raised her, and 2 extra uniforms, neatly folded. That was it. The entire sum of her life could be held in one arm. She changed out of the uniform, the dark blue fabric feeling like a costume she was finally shedding, and into a simple pair of jeans and a gray sweater that had seen better days. Each movement was heavy, weighted with a despair so profound it felt like drowning. She had no family left, no friends in the city, and the last of her savings had been spent on the bus ticket to get this job. Outside the insulated walls of the mansion, the world was a cold, unforgiving place she had no armor for. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the flimsy mattress groaning under her weight, and allowed the tears to come. They were silent, hot tracks of humiliation that slid down her cheeks and dripped onto her clasped hands. Isabella's cruelty had been surgical, aimed at the deepest insecurities Anya carried about her body and her place in the world. She had always felt invisible here, a ghost who polished silver and scrubbed floors, careful to never make a sound, to never be in the way. She had done her job perfectly, but her very existence had been an offense. After a few minutes, she forced herself to stand, wiping her face with the back of her hand. Crying wouldn't find her a place to sleep tonight. She slung the bag over her shoulder, the strap digging into her soft flesh, and took one last look at the bare room. It was as if she had never been there at all. The thought sent a fresh pang of desolation through her. She was leaving nothing behind because she had been nothing to begin with. The rain started the moment she stepped out of the staff corridor and into the main foyer. It wasn't a gentle spring shower, but a cold, driving autumn deluge, lashing against the tall arched windows and turning the world outside into a gray, blurred watercolor. A fitting farewell. The foyer was an opera of wealth, all gleaming marble and dark, polished wood. The air scented with expensive floral arrangements and lemon oil. It felt like another planet from her basement room. Anya walked across the vast, checkered floor, her worn sneakers silent on the stone. Her bag felt impossibly heavy, each step an act of will. She was just a few feet from the massive, carved oak doors, her hand trembling as she reached for the cold, ornate brass handle. This was it, the end of the only security she had known for the past year. Beyond this door was the rain, the night, and a terrifying, empty future. She braced herself, took a deep breath, and pulled. But the door didn't move inward. Instead, it swung open with immense force, pushed from the outside, revealing a wall of a man who filled the entire frame.
Marco.
He was home hours early. He stood there, his black overcoat dripping water onto the pristine marble, his dark hair slicked back from the rain. His face, all sharp angles and severe lines, was unreadable, but his eyes, the color of dark, bitter coffee, were fixed on her. They were eyes that missed nothing. They swept over her tear-stained face, the cheap sweater, the pathetic bag clutched in her hand. For the first time in the year she had worked for him, Marco was truly looking at her. Before, his gaze had slid over her as if she were part of the furniture. She was the maid, a function, a uniform. Now he saw her. He saw the trembling lip, the red-rimmed eyes, the palpable aura of despair rolling off her in waves. A flicker of something, confusion, concern, something darker, passed through his expression. The air in the foyer crackled with a new, unfamiliar tension. His presence was overwhelming, a physical force that seemed to suck all the air from the space, leaving her breathless. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. Anya, he said her name. He actually knew her name. The shock of it was a small, sharp jolt. Where are you going? It wasn't an idle question. It was a demand, quiet and absolute, layered with an authority that expected nothing less than the complete truth. Anya's throat closed up. She couldn't speak, couldn't think. His focus on her was so total, so intense, it felt like being pinned by a searchlight. She had spent a year trying to be invisible to this man, terrified of his reputation, of the whispers she heard among the other staff about his ruthlessness. Now, she had his undivided attention, and it was the most terrifying thing she had ever experienced. Before she could find her voice, the click of heels on marble announced Isabella's arrival. She swept into the foyer, a triumphant smile on her face that faltered the moment she saw Marco. "Darling, you're home early," she purred, gliding to his side and attempting to loop her arm through his. "I was just tidying up a staffing issue." Marco didn't look at her. He didn't even seem to register her touch. His gaze remained locked on Anya, a penetrating, unblinking stare that stripped away all her defenses. He took a deliberate step forward, dislodging Isabella's arm without a glance. He was closer now, close enough for her to smell the rain on his coat and the faint, clean scent of expensive cologne. He was studying her face, his eyes cataloging the tracks of her tears, the slight puffiness around her eyes. He saw the way she clutched her bag like a shield. A muscle feathered in his jaw, a single, tiny sign of a storm gathering beneath his controlled surface. He wasn't just looking. He was reading her, and the story he found there was clearly not the one Isabella was preparing to tell. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of the rain and Anya's own ragged breathing. "Is that what happened?" Marco asked again, his voice even lower this time, softer, directed only at Anya. The question was an invitation and a command. It bypassed Isabella completely, rendering her irrelevant. "Were you tidied up?" The shift in power was seismic. In that moment, in the grand foyer of his mansion, the world tilted. It was no longer the powerful fiancée and the dismissed maid. It was Marco, the absolute authority in this house, and Anya, the one he was asking for the truth. Isabella bristled, her poise cracking. "Marco, don't be ridiculous." She was incompetent. "I caught her moving things, being careless." She was disrespectful when I corrected her. "I did what was necessary." Her voice was high and tight, laced with a defensive edge that betrayed her lie. Marco still did not look at her. His eyes remained on Anya, waiting. This was her moment. She could stay silent, nod, and accept her fate, disappearing out into the rain.
Or she could speak.
The thought of contradicting Isabella, of speaking against the woman who was supposed to be the lady of this house, was terrifying. But the quiet intensity in Marco's gaze gave her a strange, fragile flicker of courage. He wasn't mocking her. He was waiting. He was listening. Anya swallowed, the sound loud in the charged silence. She said I put a vase in the wrong place. Anya whispered, her voice hoarse. She told me to get out. That she didn't want someone like me in her house. She didn't embellish. She didn't add the insults about her body or her poverty. She just gave him the simple, humiliating truth. The muscle in Marco's jaw clenched again, harder this time. A deep, dangerous stillness settled over him. He had his answer, and in the cold, flat void of his eyes as he finally, slowly, turned his head to look at his fiancée, Anya saw that he believed her. He believed the crying, penniless maid over the beautiful, pedigreed woman at his side. The world had not just tilted. It had broken wide open. "Go to the kitchen," Marco said, his voice a low command to Anya, though his eyes were still locked on Isabella. "Luca will meet you there. Wait for me." He gestured with his head toward the hallway, and a man who had been standing silently by the stairs, a man Anya recognized as Marco's head of security, stepped forward. Luca was built like a bulldog, with a shaved head and a perpetually grim expression, but he gave Anya a brief, almost imperceptible nod of reassurance. She clutched her bag and scurried past the frozen tableau of Marco and Isabella, not daring to look back. Luca followed her, his heavy footsteps echoing hers. The kitchen was a vast, stainless steel domain, gleaming and sterile under the bright fluorescent lights. It was empty, the chef's not due for another hour. Luca directed her to a small wooden table in the corner, a place usually reserved for staff meals. "Just wait here," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. He didn't ask questions. He stood by the door, a silent, imposing guard. Anya sat, placing her bag on the floor beside her. Her hands were shaking. To give them something to do, she reached for a stack of papers left carelessly on the edge of the table, intending to straighten them into a neat pile. They were shipping manifests, bills of lading for the import-export business that was the legitimate front for Marco's empire. Her gaze drifted over the columns of numbers and codes. It was a habit, a quirk of her mind. She saw patterns in things. While dusting Marco's study, she had seen hundreds of these documents. Her mind, a sponge for useless details, had absorbed the coding system for destinations, the sequence of container numbers. And on the top sheet of this pile, something was wrong. A container number, prefix CMB 818, was listed with a destination code for a warehouse in Rotterdam. But all the 800 series containers went to the domestic facility in Newark. She had seen it dozens of times. A small, nagging inconsistency. It was probably just a typo, a clerical error. But her mind snagged on it, worrying at it like a loose thread. She hesitated, her heart thumping. It was not her place. But the alternative was to sit here and drown in her anxiety. "Excuse me," she said, her voice small. Luca turned his head. I think there might be a mistake on this." She pushed the manifest across the table. "This container number. The destination code is for Europe. But this series, it should be domestic." Luca's expression didn't change, but he walked over, picked up the paper, and scanned it. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at her, his eyes narrowed in a new kind of assessment. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving quickly across the screen. He put the phone to his ear, his back to her, and began to speak in rapid, low Italian. Anya didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was urgent. It was alarmed. It was not the tone of a man dismissing a typo. The argument in the foyer was not an argument at all. It was an execution. Marco did not raise his voice. He spoke in a low, even tone that was far more terrifying than any shout. He dismantled Isabella piece by piece, not with anger, but with cold, precise logic. "You humiliated a member of my staff," he said, his voice devoid of all warmth. You abused your perceived authority in my home. And you did it because you are cruel. Because you enjoy the feeling of power it gives you to hurt someone who cannot fight back. Marco, she's a servant. Isabella cried, her composure finally shattering. She means nothing. Everyone in this house is under my protection, he stated, as if explaining a simple fact to a child. And you, Isabella, are a guest here. A guest who has just demonstrated that she cannot be trusted with the well-being of my household. You have proven yourself to be a liability. He took a step back, creating a definitive space between them. The engagement is terminated. Our families will be informed. Your things will be packed and sent to you by the end of the day. Isabella stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking stark and brittle. You can't, she whispered. You're choosing a fat, worthless maid over me? Marco's eyes turned to ice. The fact that you see her as worthless is the very reason I am choosing to have you removed from my life. He turned to the two guards who had materialized at the end of the hall. Escort Ms. Moretti from the premises. Ensure she does not return. As the guards took her arms, Isabella finally erupted, screaming threats and curses that echoed off the marble until the great oak doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off the sound. The silence she left behind was absolute. At that exact moment, Luca came striding back into the foyer, his face grim, his phone still in his hand. He went straight to Marco. Boss, he said, his voice tight. We have a problem. A big one. But I think the maid just solved it for us. Marco found her still sitting at the small table in the kitchen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He entered the room and the atmosphere changed, the air growing thick and heavy with his presence. He had shed his wet overcoat, and in his perfectly tailored dark suit, he looked like a predator in its natural element. Luca had already explained everything. The container Anya had flagged, CMB 818, was not a typo. It was a ghost, a duplicate manifest intended to misdirect a high-value shipment of electronics to a rival family's port in Rotterdam. It was an inside job, a betrayal that would have cost him millions and, more importantly, would have been a sign of weakness, an invitation for further attacks. It was a move that could have started a war. And this girl, this quiet, tear-streaked girl who he had never once given a second thought to, had seen it. She had unraveled a conspiracy by straightening a stack of papers. He stopped a few feet from her table and simply looked at her. He wasn't looking at a maid anymore. He was looking at an asset, a weapon, a mind of astonishing, untapped brilliance hidden in plain sight. He was looking at a treasure he had almost allowed to be thrown out into the rain.
Tell me what you saw, he said. His voice was different now.
The cold anger was gone, replaced by a focused, dangerous curiosity. Anya looked up, startled. She explained in a quiet, hesitant voice, detailing the numbering conventions she'd observed, the destination patterns, the tiny detail that had felt so wrong to her. As she spoke, her confidence grew. She was talking about something she understood, patterns, logic, order. It was the one area where she felt confident. The 800 series containers are always domestic freight, she finished, her voice clear and steady. It was just wrong. Marco listened, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He had spent a fortune on security analysts and logistics experts, men with advanced degrees and years of experience, and they had missed it. She had found it in 30 seconds because she paid attention while she dusted. He felt a slow, unfamiliar heat spread through his chest. It was admiration, raw and potent. And something else. Something fiercely protective. He dismissed Luca with a flick of his wrist. The kitchen door swung shut, leaving them alone in the vast, silent room. The only sounds were the hum of the industrial refrigerators and the drumming of the rain against the high windows. Marco moved closer, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. He stopped directly in front of her, so close she had to crane her neck to look up at him. She could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the hard line of his mouth. He smelled of power and the storm he had just walked through. He lifted a hand, and she flinched, expecting a blow, a dismissal, anything but what he did. His fingers, warm and calloused, brushed her cheek with impossible gentleness, his thumb tracing the path of a tear she hadn't realized was still there. "You're not leaving," he said. It wasn't a question or a request. It was a statement of fact, a rewriting of her reality. Not this house. Not ever. Anya stared at him, her heart doing a slow, heavy roll in her chest. Her mind couldn't process the shift. An hour ago, she was being thrown out like trash. Now, the most powerful man she had ever known was touching her as if she were made of glass. "I have been blind," he murmured, his voice a low, rough caress. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her wide, confused eyes. "I had a jewel in my house, and I was letting a fool polish the floors with it." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a possessive whisper that wrapped around her like a velvet chain. "This is your home now. You belong here. With me." The words sank into her, bypassing her fear and landing somewhere deep and untouched, a place that had starved for the feeling of belonging. He wasn't just offering her a job back. He was claiming her. He was seeing not just her mind, but her. He saw her soft curves, her quiet nature, her hidden strength, and he was declaring them his. "Your old room is no longer suitable," he continued, his thumb stroking her jawline. "You will have the Monet suite on the 3rd floor. It overlooks the gardens." It was one of the grandest guest suites in the mansion, a place reserved for visiting dignitaries. The idea was so absurd she almost laughed, but the deadly seriousness in his eyes stopped her.
He meant it.
Every single word. The Monet suite was larger than the entire floor of the apartment building she'd grown up in. It was decorated in soft blues and creams, with a 4-poster bed piled high with silk pillows and a private balcony that offered a sweeping view of the rain-soaked rose gardens. A fire was already crackling in the marble fireplace. It didn't feel real. None of it did. An hour after he had installed her there himself, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Marco. He was carrying a silver tray. On it was a bowl of rich, steaming soup, a piece of crusty bread, and a glass of wine. He set it down on a small table by the fire. "You haven't eaten," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. He watched her as she hesitantly sat and picked up the spoon.
He didn't eat.
He just stood by the mantel, observing her with that same unnerving, possessive intensity. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, filled with everything that had happened and everything that was about to. When she finished, he took the tray and set it aside. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will find you some new clothes. Anything you want." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, not with lust, but with something that looked like reverence. "And I want you to work with me, Anya. I want you to look at my ledgers, my manifests, my reports. I need your eyes. I need your mind." He was offering her a seat at his table, a position of trust and power she could never have dreamed of. He was giving her worth. He was crowning her. He saw the doubt and fear still warring in her eyes. He crossed the room and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. His grasp was warm and firm. "No one will ever look down on you again," he vowed, his voice a raw, iron promise. "No one will ever make you feel small in this house again. I will burn down the world for anyone who tries." And as Anya looked into the eyes of the ruthless Mafia boss, she saw not a monster, but a protector. She saw her future. She was no longer the obese maid. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was valued. She was his. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you felt that powerful moment of being truly seen and fiercely protected, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Every click helps us bring more stories like Anya's to life. Stories where the overlooked become the adored, and quiet strength is rewarded with unwavering devotion. Comment below with what you think Marco should do next to show Anya how much she means to him. We love hearing your ideas and can't wait to see you in the next story.